Hello everybody, and let's continue with our study of this system called Instancology and Absolutology. Alright, today I'm going to reiterate something about absolutology, that's the absolute part, because it's so important, and I'm somehow a little proud of it, myself, discovering this one, and so I want to say more about it. I think it's very significant, and I will let you feel so too. Okay, first a little bit background. You know, in the past century, we just turned over to the 21st century, and it's less than 20 years. We have old scientific development. Okay, we started 400 years ago from Descartes, René Descartes, of French philosopher, and from that time on, his system, his thinking of analysis, resulted in the natural science eventually, and but immediately after him, it's Newton's turn to create the classical physics. All right, we started from there. Then everything goes from there, and in the beginning of last century, we come to Einstein's relativity theory, and first the general relativity, and then later on the more broad, the second version of relativity. That's one is called, the first one is a special relativity, the other one is a general relativity. And later on, of course, we have the quantum mechanics from the Copenhagen schools. That's another thing, developing into another more deeper area. But here I want to stress the fact that within Newtonian space-time, that is absolute space-time, to Newton, the space and the time are static, and he calls it absolute, but actually it means static. Alright, till Einstein develops the general relativity. But what does the relativity mean? Or what's the significance of its philosophical meaning? And that's a question we should think about. If we philosophize it, we can say everything in the world is relative. Now, in philosophy, we have that term for a long time, but people normally won't take it as deep thinking, because relativism, that's another related meaning, is not good all the time, because it's self-contradictory, right? Alright, but I want to say it from a different point of view. That is, think about our world. The nature, or the quality, or the property, the essential essence of our world, everything we have, is relative. That's a meaning, that's a significance of this word, relativity, in philosophical sense. Alright? The other day I showed you the graph I draw, remember that one? And that is this one. If you look at it closely, you'll see the part. It goes from personal attitude. When you are a little child, you think everything is yours. Your world is the world. Till the emperor, like a Chinese emperor, think he is the number one. As Hegel says, in the Orient, the emperor is the only free man. Until next one, the fact, the Western people, the Western nations, people started to think facts because of natural science, the development of Newtonian physics. From then on, all other sciences subjects developed. Then we go to find out everything in the world, in our world, has a function. All right, we do this, we do that. Everything exists for its function. Then we come to this final part. We found everything is relative. All right. Okay, before we go to the last one, this way, I should have an arrow point to it going, turn around, eventually goes out, like our satellite. All right, out of our Milky Way galaxy. All right, and it goes to absolute. But here, before we leave our Milky Way, our system, I want to say a few things about the relative part. The relative part has its root meaning in everyday lives. Everything we say, we so-called facts or case or world in Bertrand Russell's or Wittgenstein's terms are relative. Everything is relative, and we know that life is not perfect. Our life is not perfect, and every material thing or matter is not perfect. But as a human being, we always seek something perfect. We seek it's complete. It has no defects. It's our dream, our ideal thoughts, right? It's in our mind, in Einstein's term, the Middle Age saint, or Thomas Aquinas' term. It's in our mind, and most people, the religion in the West call it God, all right? But in the Orient, we also have that concept. We call it heaven, or in India, Hinduism, we call it Buddha or something, right? We all have this concept. There is something perfect. There is something. It's more than just what we see, we feel, we touch. Our sense functioned about it, detected about it. It's more than that. We know that, right? All right. From this point, I can say that we have something called the absolute. The absolute. In other words, we say this absolute is the world. Well, in the history of philosophy, let me mention a few philosophers who mentioned absolute before. Yeah, right? Except those I mentioned in the Middle Ages, like Augustine and Saint Anselm or Saint Aquinas in the 11th to 12th century. Augustine is much earlier, like 1,000 years earlier, of course, but they all regarded God as the absolute, right? Okay, later on we have Descartes' God, we have Schelling's God, we have Hegel's God, we have Heidegger's God. Let me rephrase this one. We have Schelling's absolute. We have Hegel's absolute. We have Heidegger's absolute. But when they say absolute, they mean something absolute. They don't mean really the word absolute. For Schelling, it's the absolute nature. The natural things are absolute. For Hegel, it's a concept. It goes around from logic, inner logic, goes to the outside world, the nature, then goes back to concept, to the mind again. Eventually, the three, the trilogy, the three dialectic movement, so-called, the concept, the absolute is the concept. For Heidegger, the being, or Dasein, as he says it, being there is a human being, and that is absolute. So when he says absolute, he means the being is absolute. Alright? He thinks that's fundamental. But the theory I'm putting forward, the absolutology and the instancology, and the absolutology is the ontological part, but that word ontological is a misleading word too. I'll let you know the meaning, why I say that later. We deal with here, the system deal with the absolute itself. So here it raises one question. When you talk about absolute or absolutology, what is absolute? Do we really have it? You might ask. Alright, I gave you 5 proofs of the existence. Well, this is a misleading word too. Existence is a misleading word, trust me. Of absolute. But I just have no other way to say it. Maybe for the biggest, the uppermost category, I can say what is absolute. Absolute is not relative. That's only accurate word we can use here. Normally, definitions should not involve negation or denial of something, but it should go by categories. Right? According to logical definition, you should give the meaning in terms of category difference, categorical difference, then give examples. From two sides, give a precise definition. But here, when we come to the uppermost level, we have no other way. We have to use the definition of negation or denial of the other side. It's just like this. I give you example. How many kind of people or person, let's say 2 aliens coming from Mars, Martians, they want to know, when they come to Earth, the first thing they want to know, how many kind of people on Earth? Maybe the reply is, there's only 2 kinds, male and a female. But what is a male? One of them asks. And the reply normally is, the male is blah blah blah. Maybe it's a structure, you can say something. But do you want the other alien to remember all the differences? All the features of the male? Probably not. When you say the male is not a female, it's very clear. Then you can describe what a female is, and blah blah blah. You can say a lot of things, but the other guy still cannot remember it. But you have to say it's not male. Alright, that's clear. I know what male is. Right? So from definition defining each side of the opposite side or denying the other side, you know that what the biggest category is for male and female. Okay, here is the same thing. For absolute, you have no idea what it is till you say it's not relative. Then it's very clear. Everybody knows what relative is, right? We can say a book is relative, a TV is relative, a person, maybe his character, is relative because he has some shortcomings. Of course, he has a good part too, and his character is not perfect. You can give a lot of examples. You can say this tree is relative because it will die one day, right? It has probably not strong enough for some work you want to do. Or this stone is not good enough. It's not granite. That's better, but granite is not as better as a diamond, right? In hardness. So you can go on and on forever. But you know definitely what relative is. So when I say what is absolute, you think about that's not relative. Then you know what it is. All right? Okay. Here is for some preface, some prologue or whatever you call it, to give you an introduction of what absolute is. Now I'm going to give you the 5 proofs of existence. Again, it's a misleading word, of absolute. All right. The first one I want to give to you is called thinking paradox. I mentioned that before. I just repeat a little bit. If you didn't, go back to watch my other videos. You can know that. That is, when I myself had this experience, why my omnipresent mind cannot grasp 2 things at the same time. I cannot read a book to know the meaning of the book and watching a clock hanging on the corner of my computer at the same time. I believe my mind can do everything, but obviously I cannot concentrate doing 2 things, just one. Why? And also I'll say something about this one later. Alright? I found that that's because when I get it over, I figured it out. Because the absolute, when it creates something or when it gets something, it only have one. Any absolute, when it has something or grabs something, it must be one and one only. That's a feature of absolute. So in other words, absolute versus relative. The relative first one is something that is one. One thing, if it's a thing, it's relative, but it must be one. Not several at the same time. No way. That's very logical. My personal experience, when I figured this out, my mental problem gone. Right from there, I understood why it is. And I talked in the past many years, I think roughly 20 years, I talked to several people. I think at least I made a personal test and with at least 2 people, I got exactly the same experience. They just cannot handle it anymore. They said, no, I don't want to go on with this. It's really too mentally exhausting and it makes me crazy. I cannot think about this concept anymore. I put one case in my book, and that's ontological, Instancology and Absolutology Part 1. You can take a look. The other one I had when I was a graduate student in China. in college when I teaching, I was with a dormitory schoolmate. I tested it on him, and he admitted it's right. I cannot handle it anymore. So I know it's not my personal idiosyncrasy or something. No, it's not. It's common for everybody. You cannot grab two things at the same time. Trust me. You think your mind is powerful all the time, can do everything you want, and like a computer you can do multi-threading? No way. You can only do one thing. You can only concentrate on one thing for the logical part. Why I say that, I'll let you know later. Alright? Okay, so from the thinking paradox part, I gave you the proof. The absolute does exist, and that it creates only one thing. It grabs only one thing. It gets only one thing. That's a logic of absolute. That's for sure. You have to understand this. All right. Okay. Second proof I want to give to you is called ontological proof. What's the ontological proof? All right. Let me think about this way. As I said before, in the world we have two parts: the relative, the absolute. Right? Everybody knows that. Okay. But our body. Do you think the human being with the body, it represents everything of the world? I think you probably think I'm mature enough, or our civilization or whatever, the biological development has reached age of represents everything in the world. It should be, right? Okay, I think so too. And because we are not stones, we are not a tree, right? We are not even plants or ordinary animals, right? Okay, so your body, your organs, I'll say representing the relative part, while your mind, your brain, I mean, representing your spirit, your dream, your ideal thinking, your mental products, whatever it is. Do you agree? I think you probably will, because bodily function, we are not any different from animals, lower level animals, right? You have eyes, and an eagle has eyes too, and probably your eyes are not as good as the eagles. It can see far away than you are. You can, right? That's the truth. And probably your nose doesn't function as well as a dog, and the dog's nose is more sensitive, you know. So in terms of organic function, our body is no different than any others. That I call the relative part. But what we are peculiar, what we are special, is the mind part, the mental part, right? That part represents the part of the world. What is that part? The absolute. You get it. A little bit of modification on our side. I'll say that later. But remember, we are part of the nature. We came from nature. Your parents, our grandparents, our ancestors all come from nature, right? So we represent nature in every way. Not only the relative part, but also the absolute part. And each part of our body representing each part of the universe, or whatever our world is. All right? Okay, so that's called ontological proof. You can think about that. How can you be entirely alienated from the world? Let's say you don't think I have an absolute part. I'm not different than a stone. I'm a relative. Do you want to say that? Do you think that's true? Probably you don't think so. You're even better, smarter than a wolf, or than a whale, than a fish, right? So you have a mental part. That's Rene Descartes find. He says we as a human being has two parts, two materials, two matters in his words. One is physical matter, the other is mental matter. He calls it that way. Alright? So he is the first one to discover the two things are totally different. Alright. Now let me come to the third part. When Descartes says mental stuff is different from the material matter stuff, you will naturally think, so what's special about it? In the Professor John Searle, I think he is a Berkeley philosopher, Berkeley University of Berkeley in California. He's a philosopher in the philosophy department. He's a philosopher there. His example is, I can raise my hand any way I want. Isn't that free? And I think you can do too. You can raise your hand any way you want, anytime you want. Do you call it free? Yeah, I think so. But remember, here's the implication. Anything, if it's free, it's absolute. That means no law, nobody, not any other party can control your action. You can do the way you want it. This freedom only comes from the absolute part. So I hope those who deny consciousness, and later on I deal with that part, deny the absolute, will think about this. Do you have free will? Can you raise your hand at will, anytime you want it? I think you can, right? You don't want to say you are a slave or something. You are forbidden to do this. You don't want to say that. Alright? Okay, so this proof, the third proof, called free will proof of absolute. Alright? The number 4 is the collective proof. Alright. If I, as a person, has the free will, alright, then I don't doubt other people have it too, right? Because they are similar to me. So collectively, other human beings have this part of absolute or free will too, right? You don't doubt that. So as a logical consequence, they have free will. And they have absolute part too. Alright? I call it collective proof. Alright? If, this is more to it, if everybody, human beings collectively, have this mental part, spiritual part, which is different from the rest of the physical matter, where do you think they come from? Of course, they come from the world, the nature, or whatever you call it. Or from, if you're religious, you call it from God. But anyway, here is the philosophy. We do reason, alright? We go by reason. We don't just through our belief jump to believe something, alright? We don't do that. So this part means we in nature or in the world, we have the absolute. We have its existence. Alright? Okay, so this is number 4 proof, collective proof. Alright, the last one, the biological proof. I call it. What is biological proof? When we say we have free will, when we say my mind concentrates only on one thing at a time, when we say that, do we have any foundation for it? Biological, I mean, or physical foundation? Of course we do. That is our brain. According to modern contemporary medical research, our brain has two parts. They are two halves. They are exactly or almost exactly the same. They are connected. They have the same function. You don't think one is crippled, the other is better. You don't think that way. Okay. They are equally important. All right? The one is logical part. The other is consciousness. The logical part is responsible for syntax, for logic, for chain of thoughts, for going on of some reasoning, like computers. All right? 1, 0 goes on forever. That's called syntax. But the difference is computer doesn't know the meaning of the program, the function. We do. Why? Because we have the other part. The other part is the unity of all everything. Right? That's called consciousness. The consciousness is responsible for the meaning, for the semantics. That's why the consciousness part creates new things, has creativity. Everything like arts, music, the appreciation of the beauty, anyway, the creativity. Anything as a meaning is related to this part. All right? So, at this point, I think I made it very clear. The two parts, the consciousness, the logical part, the thinking, they are equally important. I'll say that part anymore. How they cooperate with each other, how they, as a team, working constantly back and forth and back and forth. I'll have some assumptions or have some postulates I'll discuss later. But I just want you to know we have these parts. They are both absolute. All right? And actually in my system, I call it relatively absolute. Because not absolutely absolute. That's because they are inside your head. In other words, they come with the property of time and space. When things develop into matter, it comes with space and time. It becomes localized. It becomes relative. Anything within the relative is called relatively. Okay, so for they, but they still have the part of absolute, being absolute. So I call it relatively absolute. In your head, it is. Okay, but the implication of that is there's a big, big world which is not relative, that is absolute. All right? So that's a thing I want you to know. Okay, time, it's a long time already, so I want to finish it soon. Okay, the last part I want to say is, what's the significance of discovering the absolute part? No matter it's called absolutely absolute or called relatively absolute as two halves in your brain. It doesn't matter. You have the capability of absolute, being absolute. Either in terms of logic, that is the left half of the brain, or creativity, or appreciation of music, beauty, drawings, whatever, on the consciousness part. That's the right half. Alright? So, think about this. Draw the absolute from your mind to understand this. You can create something entirely new, different from any other people on earth. That's how God, absolute, endowed on you. Don't waste this part, alright? Everybody of us, since we are in the property of time and space, we will have to see God one day. But let this part expand, function, alright? I always say there's three necessities for people. Not only eat, not only sex, the third thing is thinking, absolute part. That is creativity. As a human being, remember, you are special. Don't let this absolute part ignore you, or you without knowing it. Alright? Okay. Today I'm going to stop here. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you next time.